I suppose every story about family and money begins long before the first dollar is ever earned. Mine began on a quiet winter morning, the kind where the light seems to rest on the windows instead of passing through them. I remember standing beside the kitchen counter, fingers wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, when the words that would change the shape of my family first echoed in my mind. They were not spoken out loud that morning, but I could feel them rising, like a storm forming somewhere far, far away. But nothing prepared me for the words my own daughter would later speak, in a room full of polished wood and old paintings. She looked at me with a smile too sharp for such a soft face, and said, "You get nothing, Dad." People often ask me what anger feels like in a moment like that, but truthfully, I didn't feel anger. I felt something stranger, something quieter, like someone had opened a window in my chest and let all the warm air out. But that is not where the story begins. Stories like these don't start at the betrayal. They start in the gentle places, the small routines, the familiar steps of a house you've lived in long enough to walk through blind. And so I'll start there, back when mornings were simple, and I still believed that legacy was something you built with your hands, not something that could be shattered by a single sentence spoken by your own child. My home sat at the edge of a lake in northern Michigan. Old pine trees stood like tall, patient guardians around it. In the summers, their needles made the ground smell like warm resin and childhood. In the winters, their branches bowed under the weight of snow like old men leaning into the wind. I had built the house myself, or at least built enough of it to say I had. The beams in the living room still held the marks of my early mistakes. A carpenter once told me that a home is less about walls and more about the stories that cling to them. I didn't understand that at the time. I was busy building a company, building a name, building something that I thought my children would inherit with pride. My daughter, Emily, was my firstborn. She had her mother's soft eyes and my stubborn jaw. When she was little, she used to run down the old wooden dock and jump into the lake with a kind of wild fearlessness that made my heart stutter. Her laughter would bounce across the water like a pebble skipping. I used to think that if joy had a sound, it would be my daughter's laugh echoing across a summer lake. But time changes children, and sometimes success changes fathers. My company began as a modest lumber operation, nothing glamorous. Just a few trucks, a handful of workers, and the belief that honest wood and honest hands could still build an honest life. But opportunities grew, markets shifted, and soon enough, we weren't just selling lumber. We were building homes, designing developments, shaping entire communities from the ground up. People started calling me a visionary. I didn't feel like one. I felt like a man stacking one plank on top of another, hoping nothing would collapse beneath him. Emily grew up watching it all. She watched the way people shook my hand with respect. She watched the late night calls, the deals struck over dinners, the checkbooks that got bigger and heavier with every passing year. And perhaps without meaning to, I taught her something I didn't intend to teach, that money was the language of importance. She once asked me, "Dad, what does $1 million feel like?" I laughed and said, "Like nothing, sweetheart. It's just paper." But maybe that was the moment the seed was planted, the moment she learned that money meant something deeper to me than I cared to admit. Her brother, Michael, was different. He had a softer heart. I used to find him sitting in the workshop behind the house, building little wooden boats or fixing old radios. He liked things he could hold, things that hummed or glowed or floated on water. He didn't care about balance sheets or land acquisitions. He cared about moments. I didn't appreciate that enough while the world was applauding me. And when you don't appreciate something in time, life has a way of reminding you. It was the year I turned 70, too, when everything started shifting. I felt it during the quiet moments when the coffee didn't taste quite the same, when the mornings felt a little too long, when the lake seemed to reflect more of my face than the sky. My wife, Margaret, used to say, "Aging isn't about growing old. It's about growing honest." I didn't understand that until she passed. Loss has a way of peeling away the layers you thought were permanent. After she was gone, the house felt too big, the nights too silent, and my children, well, they felt like strangers I used to know. We didn't drift apart all at once. It happened slowly, missed dinners, shorter visits, conversations that revolved around the company instead of the heart. The world applauded my success, but my own children stood somewhere on the sidelines, waiting for the pieces I had forgotten to give them. And then came the question I had been avoiding for years. What happens when I'm gone? My attorney, an old friend named Robert, sat across from me one afternoon with his glasses perched low on his nose. "It's time to finalize your estate plan," he said gently. $255 million. That was the number he mentioned, the value of everything I had built. The land, the companies, the shares, the patents, the properties scattered across states. A lifetime condensed into a number. I remember sitting there, staring at the paperwork, wondering how something that took decades of sweat and sacrifice could be summarized so neatly. I thought of Emily, with her sharp ambition and hungry eyes. I thought of Michael, with his quiet hands and gentle heart. I thought of the space between them, the unspoken rivalry, the unbalanced scales. I wanted to be fair, but fairness isn't always symmetry. And love, well, love is never measured in equal halves. The first will I drafted favored Emily. It seemed logical at the time. She was the one involved in the company. She attended the board meetings. She knew the numbers. She would keep the business alive, but something in me hesitated. A week later, I rewrote it. This time, Michael would receive the controlling interest. He would protect the values the company was built on: integrity, patience, care. That didn't feel right either. It took me 3 months and countless sleepless nights to realize that the inheritance wasn't the real problem. The real problem was the space that had grown between us, the silence we carefully tiptoed around. My children weren't fighting over money. They were fighting over meaning, over identity, over the love they didn't quite know how to ask for anymore. But the day of the will reading arrived sooner than I thought it would. And none of us were ready, not them, not me, not even the attorney who had known me for 3 decades. If I had known what Emily was going to say that day, I might have prepared myself differently. I might have braced my heart the way a man braces himself before a storm. But storms don't ask for permission. They simply arrive, and when Emily leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and smirked in front of that polished wooden table, her words cut through the room with a softness that hurt more than any shout. "You get nothing, Dad." The room fell silent. Even the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to hold its breath. But Robert, my attorney, simply placed a hand on the stack of papers and said in a steady voice, "Emily, let me finish." And that is when the truth, the real truth, finally began. Robert's voice lingered in the air, gentle but firm, as if it carried the weight of something none of us had yet understood. "Let me finish," he repeated, and his fingers brushed the edge of the papers like a historian turning a fragile page. Emily shifted in her seat. Her smirk faltered, not all at once, but like a candle flame touched by a draught. She looked away, toward the tall windows of the conference room, where the winter light pressed against the glass but couldn't get through. I could see her chest rise and fall, slow and shallow, the way it used to when she was a child trying not to cry. But she didn't cry, not Emily, not anymore. I didn't respond to her words. I didn't trust my voice. Silence felt safer, like a soft coat thrown over a wound, and strangely, I didn't feel the sting of betrayal yet. What I felt instead was age, not the physical kind, not the aching knees or the stiff fingers. It was the age that settles in your spirit when you begin to realize that time has been whispering warnings you chose not to hear. Robert cleared his throat. "This is not a typical will," he said, adjusting his glasses, "and it won't be read in a typical order." Emily's eyes snapped back toward him. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," he paused, glancing at me first, "your father had his reasons." Her jaw tightened. Reasons for what? Cutting himself out of his own will. I felt Michael's quiet gaze on me then. He hadn't spoken once since the meeting began. He sat with his hands folded gently in his lap, thumbs tapping nervously. He had always been like that calm water on the surface, storms churning somewhere beneath. His silence wasn't emptiness, it was depth. Robert continued reading from the top of the document, speaking slowly, each word landing like a stone dropped carefully into still water. And as he spoke, my mind drifted not away from the room, but deeper into it. Into the spaces where memories hide. I remembered Emily at 10 years old, standing beside me on the lakeshore as the sun sank low. She wore an oversized flannel shirt of mine, the sleeves rolled up until they reached her elbows. She asked me that night, "Dad, if you had nothing at all, no company, no money, would you still be you?" I told her, "Sweetheart, I'd be more me than ever." But those were easy words spoken by a man who had everything. The truth is, success shapes you, and sometimes, without meaning to, it shapes the people around you too. As Robert read the early clauses of the will, the small bequests, the charitable donations, the instructions for the lake house, Emily listened with growing impatience. She wanted the heart of it, the empire, the number she had seen on the valuation report, $255 million. She wanted the part that mattered, at least the part she thought mattered. Finally, Robert reached the paragraph that held the first real fracture of the afternoon. Clause 14, he read, regarding the distribution of corporate control. Emily leaned forward, eyes sharp. Michael straightened in his seat, though his face remained soft, almost unsure. Robert exhaled, the way a man does before delivering either a miracle or a blow. Before I read this section, he said, I need you both to understand something. Your father rewrote this will more times than any client I've had in 30 years, and each version reflected something he was struggling to put into words. Emily scoffed. Struggling, Dad? He doesn't struggle, he decides. Michael shot her a look not angry, but wounded on my behalf. Emily didn't notice. Robert continued. He struggled with fairness, with legacy, with the different ways he loved both of you. This document isn't about money, it's about understanding. Emily rolled her eyes. Just read it. And so he did. In matters concerning the company, Robert read, neither child shall receive controlling interest automatically. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like another person in the room. Emily blinked. What then who? Robert raised a hand. Let me finish. But Emily wasn't listening. Her voice sharpened. You're telling me you're giving control of the company to some board, to outsiders, after everything I've done. You haven't heard the rest. Robert said gently. Michael remained still, though I could sense his disappointment too. He had never wanted power, but he had hoped for trust. Perhaps that was my fault, for assuming trust could be implied without ever being spoken. Robert continued reading. The company will be placed in a temporary trust, he said, and neither heir will receive immediate authority. Instead, both will undergo a 1-year stewardship period. Emily frowned. A what? A stewardship period? Robert repeated. During which your actions, priorities, and treatment of the company's values, not its profits, will determine your eligibility. Emily looked at me then, directly, for the first time that morning, and the look wasn't angry. It was something far harder to watch. It was confusion, hurt. A daughter realizing the world wasn't bending the way she expected it to. Dad, she said quietly, why would you do that? My voice finally found its way back to me, slow and careful. Because I spent 40 years teaching you both how to build things, I said, but I never taught you how to carry them. She swallowed. I could see her throat tremble. Robert wasn't finished, and he continued, during this year, each of you will be given equal access, resources, and opportunity, but not authority. You must work together. Emily's eyes widened. Together with him, Michael flinched, though he said nothing. Robert read the next line. If after the stewardship period, one heir demonstrates a commitment to the company's founding principles, integrity, patience, and genuine care, then that heir will inherit the entire business. Emily's hand tightened into a fist. And if neither does, Robert said softly, the company will be dissolved and donated to the workers who helped build it. That was the moment Emily stood up so abruptly, her chair scraped across the hardwood like a shout. This is ridiculous, she snapped. Dad, what kind of game are you playing? I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have one, but because answers spoken in anger never land where they're meant to. Instead, I looked at her the way a father looks at a child who has wandered far from home without realizing it. And because silence unnerved her, she continued. You raised me to be strong, to be ambitious, to take charge, and now you want me to play some sentimental competition. For what? Michael finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. For the right reasons, he said. Emily spun toward him. Oh, don't you start. You never cared about the company. You care about books and tools and that stupid workshop. Michael's jaw clenched. It's not stupid. Enough. The word came from me not loud, but heavy enough to slow the air. I rarely used that tone. They both froze, and in the silence that followed, I felt something inside me settle. Not peace, not yet, but something like resolve, the quiet certainty that this hard moment was necessary. that clarity sometimes requires discomfort. Robert cleared his throat again, softer this time. "There is more," he said. Emily let out a humorless laugh. "Of course there is." He continued reading. "In the event of my death, I leave to my daughter, Emily, and my son, Michael, not money, but the opportunity to rediscover what we lost along the way." Emily frowned. "What does that even mean?" And then came the line that shifted the room in a way none of us expected. "It means, Robert Reed, that the financial inheritance is not the most important part of this will. The final clause concerns something far more personal." Emily crossed her arms. "Get to it." Robert looked at me. I nodded. He read slowly, as if the words were fragile. "My estate shall not be divided until my children have shared 1 full year of their lives together, monthly, without fail." Emily blinked. "Shared? How?" Robert looked at her evenly. "You must spend 1 day each month with your brother, without business, without lawyers, without negotiations, a day dedicated only to family." Emily stared at him, speechless. "And if we refuse?" she asked finally. Robert's voice softened even more. "Then," he said, "you receive nothing, neither of you." The room fell still, completely still, and for the first time since the meeting began. I saw something shift behind Emily's eyes, not anger, not ambition, fear, and a grief she didn't know how to name. Fear is a strange thing in grown children. It doesn't look like trembling hands or a quivering voice. It looks like stillness, the kind that settles behind the eyes when a person realizes they've run out of places to hide. That's what I saw in Emily as the last words of my will hovered in the quiet room. "You receive nothing, neither of you." She didn't move at first. Her lips parted slightly, then pressed together again, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't trust her own voice. Her gaze drifted away from me, away from Robert, and settled somewhere on the polished table, a place where she didn't have to acknowledge the weight pressing against her chest. Michael didn't fidget. He didn't breathe deeply or look confused. He simply lowered his head the way a man bows out of respect rather than defeat. He understood something in that moment, something Emily wasn't ready to. He understood that the will wasn't about punishing them. It was about asking them to remember each other, and remembering, that's often the hardest thing. Emily finally spoke, her voice thin and sharp around the edges. "So this is it, then? A test, eh? A family therapy assignment wrapped in legal nonsense?" Robert shook his head gently. "It's not nonsense, Emily. Your father thought. I don't care what he thought." She snapped. Her words hit me harder than she intended, not because they were cruel, but because they carried a kind of trembling beneath them. Like someone standing on a frozen lake, hearing the first crack spreading underneath. I remained silent. Silence is sometimes the only language a parent has left. Emily turned her anger toward me finally, but even then, she wouldn't look directly into my eyes. "Dad," she said, "you're asking for something impossible." "Is it impossible?" I asked softly. "Yes." Her laugh was brittle. "Michael and I haven't been close since." She stopped. The word she almost said floated in the air between us. "Since Mom died." Michael closed his eyes, and I saw a shadow pass across his face, a memory, maybe, or regret, or both. I took a slow breath. "Your mother wanted this before I did," I said quietly. Emily's expression softened just a fraction, a small crack in a very tall wall. Robert placed the pages of the will aside, folding his hands in front of him. "There is one more section," he said gently. "It might help you understand why your father made these decisions." I could see Emily's frustration, her exhaustion, but somewhere beneath all that, curiosity flickered. Even anger can bend under the weight of the unknown. "Fine," she muttered. Robert lifted a single sealed envelope, one I had written late one night at the lake house under the amber glow of a lamp. My handwriting on the front looked unsteady. It had been a difficult night. Some truths are harder to write than to speak. This letter, Robert said, was to be read aloud only after you both heard the terms. He opened it carefully and began reading. "My dear children, if you are hearing this, then I am no longer here to make mistakes in person. So I leave you instead the mistakes I made in silence." Emily's posture stiffened. Michael looked up slowly. "I did not grow up with wealth. I grew up with absence, a father who worked himself into the ground, a mother who counted coins instead of blessings, and I promised myself that my own children would never know that kind of wanting." Robert paused, letting the words settle. "But somewhere along the way, I misunderstood what children truly want. I thought it was security, opportunity, comfort, and though those things matter, they are not family. Family is the time you give, not the money you leave. Emily lowered her eyes. I saw her swallow hard. Robert continued. When your mother died, something in all of us broke. You drifted apart while I drifted into my work, the one place where I still felt useful. I believed time would fix the rest. I believed grief made each of us silent for a while, but silence became our habit. A tear slipped quietly down Michael's cheek. He didn't wipe it away. I cannot leave my legacy in the form of guilt or resentment. I cannot leave you wealth that widens the distance between you. So I leave you the one thing that matters more than the company. I leave you each other. The room grew unbearably still. Emily closed her eyes, and I saw her breathing falter, not in weakness but in recognition. Robert's voice softened as he read the final lines. If you choose to walk away from this, you walk away not from money, but from healing. Whatever you decide, do it with honesty, with courage, and maybe someday with forgiveness. When the letter ended, no one spoke. Even the winter light felt heavier. Then Emily whispered something so quietly the air almost swallowed it. I didn't know you felt that way. Her voice cracked on the last word. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the years between us stretch and collapse all at once. I know, I said softly, and that's why I wrote it. Emily looked up finally. Her eyes were bright, not with anger, but with something that had been buried deep, something young, something fragile. You could have just told us, she said, the accusation gentle, almost childlike. I tried, I replied, but sometimes a parent speaks, and the world speaks louder. She looked away again. I was so busy trying to impress you, Dad, trying to prove I could handle the company, that I wasn't a disappointment. My heart ached. You were never a disappointment. She shook her head. I didn't know that. Michael finally spoke, voice steady but soft. Em, he said, you don't have to do everything alone. She didn't look at him. Not yet, but her shoulders lowered, just slightly a sign softer than a truce, but more honest. I don't know if I can do this. She whispered, the whole, spending time together thing, it feels forced. It's not forced, I said. It's intentional. She let out a slow, shaky breath. I'm angry, Dad. She finally admitted, I'm angry at the will, I'm angry at you, I'm angry at myself, I don't even know why. I nodded gently. Anger is grief wearing a tougher coat. Her eyes flicked up toward me, not quite agreement, not quite disbelief, but recognition. Robert closed the folder quietly. We don't have to decide today. The law gives you 30 days to accept or decline the stewardship terms. Emily pressed her palms to her face. I need time. Michael nodded. We both do. I felt something loosen in my chest, not relief, not joy, but the first soft breath after holding one's lungs tight for years. Emily stood slowly, her movements unsteady. Dad, she said, voice quiet, I didn't mean what I said earlier. I know, I replied. People say sharp things when they're scared. Her eyes glistened. Are you scared? Sometimes, I said, but I think we're allowed to be. She nodded, then walked toward the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. I'll call you, she murmured. Not a promise, but not avoidance either. Michael rose too, offering me a small, tired smile. We'll talk soon, Dad. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. When the door closed behind them, the room felt larger, quieter, but not empty. Robert placed a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, he said. Ask me again in a year. I replied softly. He smiled. I will. I looked at the chair where Emily had sat, the tension still lingering like warm air after someone has left a room in anger. Then I looked at Michael's seat, the calm, the quiet, the hope. 2 children, 2 hearts, 2 directions, now forced to walk toward one another again. And maybe, I thought, just maybe, this was the only way. I didn't stay long after that. I waited until Emma came home from school, gave her a kiss on the forehead, and told her I'd see her soon. Michael stayed in his room. Anna stayed in the kitchen. Sarah didn't come out again. I walked out quietly, closing the front door without making a sound. Some endings don't explode. They drift. The evening wind felt colder than the morning one, as if it had gathered the chill from every unspoken thing in that house. I started the car, sat still with my hands on the steering wheel, and let the silence settle. Then I drove home on a road that looked longer than it ever had. Home felt different when I entered, not heavier, just quieter, like it finally understood what I had been unable to say all these months. I took off my coat, hung it on the back of the chair, and stood in the middle of the living room thinking about nothing and everything at once. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt. Still, the kind of stillness that comes after a wave pulls back into the ocean, leaving the sand wet and shining but emptied of its roar. For dinner, I warmed up leftover chicken soup. It tasted fine, though I hardly noticed. I turned on the lamp by the sofa, the one with the soft yellow light that made the room look warmer than it was, and I sat down with a notebook, not to write anything meaningful, just to put thoughts somewhere other than inside me. I wrote one line, "Some distances save relationships." I closed the notebook. That was enough for one night. Around 8 p.m., I checked my phone, no messages, not even a courtesy text like "you reached home." Perhaps they were still talking among themselves, perhaps arguing, perhaps sitting in separate corners of the house pretending everything was normal. I didn't know, and strangely, I didn't need to. I slept early. Not deeply, not peacefully, just enough to pull down the curtain on that day. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, old habits, old rhythms. I made coffee and stepped outside onto the small porch. The sky was a soft gray, the kind that looks like it's thinking about turning blue but hasn't made up its mind yet. The air smelled like cold earth. For a moment, I wondered if I had been too harsh. Then the memory returned. Sarah's whisper, the sting of it, the carelessness of it. And I remembered something older than that, years of being the person who always adjusted, always forgave, always understood. It's a strange thing when your resilience becomes the very reason people think you'll tolerate anything. I didn't want bitterness. I wanted boundaries. Around 9 a.m., I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up but answered on the third ring. A calm, professional voice greeted me. "Mr. Turner, this is Laura Collins. We spoke last year regarding assisted living properties." I remembered her vaguely, a realtor specialized in senior communities. We had talked once when I was researching options for an old friend. "Yes, Laura," I said. "It's been a while. I know this is sudden." She said, "But a new private unit has opened up in the Maplewood residency. They remembered you were interested in tranquil environments with garden access. I thought you'd want to know before it gets listed. Maplewood." I had visited once, quiet, clean, not crowded, a place built for people who didn't want noise, only dignity. I hadn't considered it for myself at the time. I said I'd think about it. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table for a long while. The chair felt firmer under me, the room emptier than usual, and yet something inside me felt unexpectedly spacious, as if I had room to breathe again. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. Not hurried, not angry, just hesitant. I opened it and found Michael standing there, shoulders hunched, hair a mess, eyes tired. He had driven without telling anyone. That much I could tell. "Dad," he said, voice cracking at the edges. I stepped aside and let him in. He walked to the living room but didn't sit. He stood there staring at his own hands, rubbing the palms together like he was trying to warm them or gather courage. "I didn't know she said that," he murmured. The room stayed quiet, not accusing, just letting him fill it. "I should have defended you," he continued, eyes dropping lower. "I should have said something. I should have." His voice faded. I don't know why I froze. Because he always froze when things got uncomfortable. Because he didn't like conflict. Because he convinced himself silence was safer than friction. But I didn't say any of this. He lifted his head. "Dad, I don't want there to be distance between us. There already was, but distance isn't always a punishment. Sometimes it's an answer." I spoke gently. "We don't need to fix everything today, Michael." He nodded, relieved and ashamed at the same time. "I'll talk to Sarah," he said. "I'll make this right." I didn't tell him what I knew deep inside. Some things aren't made right, they're just acknowledged. Before he left, he hugged me, a real hug, tight. The kind children give their fathers before they understand pride. For a moment, he rested his forehead on my shoulder, like he had as a boy. When he pulled away, he whispered, "I'm sorry." I put a hand on his back. "Be better, that's all." He nodded again, walked to the door, and paused. "Will you come over next week, just for dinner? Let's see how things unfold." I said softly. He understood. He didn't push. After he left, the house felt even quieter, but not in a lonely way, in a clean way, like a room that had finally been aired out. Later that evening, I brewed tea and sat by the window as the last strip of daylight faded. My mind drifted to small memories, Emma's drawings on their fridge, Michael's awkward teenage years, Sarah's gentler moments, the family dinners where laughter spilled into the hall. Memories don't vanish just because people falter. But neither should self-respect. I picked up my notebook again and wrote, "Peace isn't always where you started. Sometimes it's where you stand now." I closed it softly. Tomorrow would arrive whether I worried about it or not. And whatever it brought, distance, closeness, clarity, I felt ready, not triumphant, not defeated, just ready. A few days passed quietly, no arguments, no explanations, no long messages trying to stitch things back together. Just a soft, steady silence, the kind that lets you hear your own thoughts again. On Thursday morning, as sunlight filtered through the curtains in pale ribbons, I made a decision. Not out of anger, not out of hurt, but out of clarity. I drove to Maplewood Residency. The gate was open, washed in gold light. A few residents walked slowly along the path, hands clasped behind their backs, enjoying the calm rhythm of the morning. A gardener trimmed leaves with quiet precision. The place had the kind of peace that doesn't need to announce itself. Laura greeted me at the entrance, clipboard in her hand, smile gentle but not intrusive. "We kept the unit reserved for you," she said as we walked. The room she showed me was small but warm, a single bedroom unit with a window that overlooked a garden of orange marigolds and slow, swaying pines. There was a reading chair in the corner, the kind that welcomed you instead of challenging your posture. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh laundry. I stood by the window, watching sunlight settle on the leaves like gold dust. "It's quiet here," I said. Laura nodded. "Most who choose Maple aren't looking to be taken care of. They're looking to be unburdened. Unburdened. The word fit something inside my chest. I'll take it," I said softly. The paperwork took about an hour. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. And when everything was signed, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a small, steady kind of freedom. Not the dramatic kind, the gentle kind. On the drive back home, I didn't think about how my son would react or what Sarah would say. I didn't picture arguments or apologies. I only felt a strange quiet forming inside me, the quiet that comes when you stop standing at a door, waiting to be welcomed. Back at home, I made a list of what I'd take with me and what I'd leave behind. Most of the things in my house weren't sentimental. They were just objects that had served their time. Clothes, books, the old dining table, the picture frames on the wall. But there were a few things I packed carefully. Emma's crayon drawing of a crooked house with a sun twice the size of the roof. A photograph of Michael at age 7 holding his first baseball glove. A seashell Sarah once gave me before she learned to harden herself against the world. Even broken relationships start with kindness. I folded a few shirts, a sweater, and my old leather-bound notebook. Everything else I left where it was not abandoned, just released. That evening, the sky turned the color of fading embers. I sat on the porch one last time, drinking tea, breathing in the light wind that carried the scent of pine and distant rain. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel triumph, just acceptance. Around 7 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was Michael. "Dad, can we drop by this weekend?" I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "I'll be moving this weekend. I'll send you the new address." The typing dots appeared almost immediately. Stopped, appeared again, stopped again. Then finally, one sentence. "Are you moving because of us?" I let the question sit in the palm of my hand for a while before answering. "I'm moving because I need peace." No anger. No accusation. Just the truth. He didn't reply after that, and I didn't expect him to. Later that night, as I closed the last box, a strange emotion washed over me, not grief, but a quiet gratitude. Gratitude for the years we had. Gratitude for the lessons hidden in disappointments. Gratitude for the courage to start fresh, even at an age when people think you should have already settled. On moving day, I drove to Maplewood with the passenger seat full of boxes and the back seat stacked with carefully wrapped memories. The road looked the same, but I felt different, lighter, even with the weight of the past riding along. When I reached, the air was crisp. The pines swayed softly. A resident waved at me from a wooden bench without knowing my name, offering a simple, wordless welcome. Inside my new unit, I placed the seashell on the windowsill, the photo of Michael on the bedside table, and Emma's drawing on the wall where the morning light would touch it first. The room felt complete. Not because it was full, but because it wasn't. That evening, I stepped out into the garden, letting the calm wash over me. The world felt slower here, as if time respected the need for quieter hours. As I walked along the winding path, fireflies began to appear, small floating lights drifting in gentle arcs. I watched them rise and fall like soft whispers across the twilight. For a moment, everything stilled. The past, the pain, the misunderstandings, the whispered cruelty behind a kitchen door. All of it faded, not erased but softened like footprints disappearing into the tide. I sat on a bench beneath a pine tree, closed my eyes, and breathed in the evening air. And in that simple breath, I understood something I had spent years trying to learn. You don't always get justice, you don't always get apologies, you don't always get the ending you deserved, but you can choose peace. And in choosing it, you reclaim a piece of yourself you didn't even know was missing. When I opened my eyes again, the sky had darkened into a deep blue. Lights flickered on across the residency windows like warm constellations. Life wasn't perfect, family wasn't healed, wounds weren't magically closed, but I was standing in a place where I could breathe, where I could rest, where I could be myself without waiting for permission. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough.